Brits. And more than a quarter of dog owners say they spend more money spoiling their dog than they spend spoiling their significant other. Rhiannon, Mona?
I don't even have a pearl necklace. I'm a little jealous.
You know what, though? The sad part is the dog's wearing the pearl necklace like, I just wanted a beg and strip.
Right.
What am I going to do with this?
Give me some of that processed food.
Right.
Not the homemade stuff.
That's what's making news in America this morning.
It's Friday, August 19th. You'll be able to see the FBI's reasoning for raiding Mar-a-Lago, parts of it anyway. We start here. A judge tells the DOJ that the country needs to see the affidavit that led to an FBI search.
It lays out the evidence and the probable cause, according to the Justice Department, to believe that a crime has been committed.
Not everything will make it into the public, though. We'll go over what we know. It's a record-breaking punishment by the NFL.
I'm going to continue to stand on my innocence and keep pushing forward.
But is half a game for each accusation of sexual misconduct enough? And in a record-breaking year, this is what a calm month at the border looks like.
The two guys in red, those guys just got dropped off at the bridge right up top, and they're already back around and crossing again.
We'll take you to Texas as even more people prepare to cross the Rio Grande. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. What's the more important legal proceeding? A case where someone's going to jail or the release of a basic document? Yesterday, there were two cases involving former President Donald Trump. One was the man who ran finances for his company pleaded guilty to tax evasion.
It certainly implicates the company, and it could be very hard to defend the company against these charges when it comes time for trial in October.
It's a big deal, and yet it might be the other case with the most at stake.
You know, what's happening in Florida, these are issues of first impression, we call them. Never happened before, and I do think some of these things relating to Donald Trump could end up all the way to the High Court.
Because in a moment where Trump is considering whether to run for president again, where his supporters are furious about his home being raided by the FBI, and amid questions over transparency and violent threats to law enforcement, a Florida judge had to decide what Americans have a right to know about this raid. We've got a partial answer here, so let's get into it with ABC senior national correspondent Terry Moran this morning. Terry, can you just walk me through the argument that was playing out in court yesterday and why it was such a big deal?
Absolutely. On one side, the Department of Justice, which executed this search warrant at the home of the former president, an unprecedented situation in the history of the United States. On the other side, media organizations who said in a case like this, unprecedented, that has stirred up, as you point out, so much rage and fury among the former president's supporters, the public needs to know as much as it possibly can.
We are entitled to monitor the affairs of our government at all levels.
That sunshine is the best disinfectant, that transparency will calm the public, and it's in the public interest. That was the argument in court.
The media companies are saying, all right, don't give us everything, but try to redact your information that you're worried about. And Justice says in reply, by then, it would be just gobbledygook. There'd be nothing to understand if we redacted everything.
The Justice Department saying, hey, this is a roadmap to the investigation, this affidavit that is sealed right now that justified the search of Mar-a-Lago. It lays out the evidence and the probable cause, according to the Justice Department, to believe that a crime has been committed. The department didn't want that unsealed, doesn't want it unsealed because, A, it's a roadmap in a still ongoing investigation. B, there's classified material in it, they say. And C, the danger to witnesses because of this rage and fury. So those are the stakes. The judge heard it and tried to split the baby a little bit, saying, I'm not inclined. He said, I'm not prepared to let this affidavit, which is a sworn statement by a federal investigator, remain fully sealed.
He is not inclined to keep the entirety of the search warrant application and its affidavit under seal, meaning that he understands that the public is going to likely be entitled to some parts of this warrant application and its affidavit.
So he gave the Justice Department lawyers 1 week to determine what they believe could be made public and what they would redact, black out.
But what would that even look like, Terry? What is the information that would come out of all this if it's going to have big black lines running through it?
Right. That anybody who's ever dealt with the Department of Justice when they're required to reveal something they don't like are very familiar with those thick black lines, right? We've all seen documents where basically the whole page, except for the page number, maybe, is blacked out. And it's quite possible that this, at the end of the day, will look like that. On the other hand, the sworn statement would have information about contact between the Justice Department lawyers and investigators and Trump's people. There's no reason to keep that secret. It would simply map out sort of what's been going on between these two parties, and we'd get some sense of that. Now, there might be, classified material, and courts defer to the government's claims and concerns around classified material. But there would be other issues, a timeline, perhaps. There'd be some sense of what these presidential records, both classified and unclassified, have to deal with. But what we are looking at is that this case is going to go on now, not just as a legal matter, but as a political matter.
If the nature of these documents is what appears to be, this is very serious.
We need the affidavit. Show your cards. Merrick Garland can't have it both ways. He can't give us the inventory, the warrant, without telling us why it was necessary.
Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is a by-the-books prosecutor, and he has always been very careful and very thorough. But there's no question he'd better have all of his ducks in a row on this one, and a very good justification. Because if this turns out to fizzle out, as investigations sometimes do, the distrust in our system will deepen, and the corrosive politics that we're living through will get worse. And so there's tremendous amount at stake in this search warrant and what they were looking for and what they found.
Yeah, and the DOJ can still appeal whatever this decision ends up being. So much more to come. Terry Moran there in Washington. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brad.
Next up on Start Here, how many accusations would warrant a year-long suspension? Well, apparently 20 isn't enough. We're back after the break.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
Elizabeth Holmes found guilty on 4 counts of fraud, facing the possibility of decades in prison. Now, we take you inside the courtroom and behind the scenes. The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes on Trial. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
My wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident. There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
We're honored. ABC's 2020, this year nominated for 10 Emmy Awards for excellence. Thank you for making 2020 Friday night's most watched news magazine. ABC News, America's #1 news source.
We are just a few weeks away from the beginning of the NFL season, but one of the biggest questions of this offseason had nothing to do with wins and losses.
For more than a month, the Browns and the NFL world have been on hold, waiting on a decision on a potential suspension for quarterback Deshaun Watson.
Deshaun Watson is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but in recent months was accused by not 1, not 2, but more than 20 massage therapists.
Ashley Solis was the first woman to file a civil lawsuit against the NFL star.
I got into massage therapy to heal people. Deshaun Watson has robbed me of that.
She claims Watson touched her with his genitals during a massage in 2020, similar to what the other 21 women who have filed suits allege.
A few weeks ago, he reached settlements with the vast majority of these women. As part of these settlements, he did not admit to any wrongdoing, and it was only after he settled that the NFL went forward with disciplining him. Well, after the NFL and the Players Union took this to an independent arbiter, the NFL said that proposed suspension wasn't enough, and yesterday went ahead and suspended Deshaun Watson for most of this season and handed landed him a record fine.
For us to be able to move forward, I have to be able to take steps and put pride to the side, and I'm going to continue to stand on my innocence.
And it all raises the question, if the NFL thinks these allegations were remotely true, is this new punishment even enough? Let's bring in ESPN's Mina Kimes, who's an analyst for NFL Live. And Mina, can you just describe the NFL's decision here?
Yeah, Brad. So it's the end of a very long, winding journey for Deshaun Watson for NFL. I would say it's not the end of the journey, of course, for the many women who accused him of sexual misconduct. I think that's important to note because sometimes we feel like when these suspensions happen, okay, the story's over. Well, it's not really over.
He tainted a profession in which I take enormous pride. Flashes of Watson's face rushed to me in the moment.
The independent arbiter they hired to come down with the first suspension, by the way, that was the first time that's happened as part of the new collective bargaining agreement between the NFL and the Players Association, essentially ruled that it was going to be 6 games based largely on precedent.
The judge wrote that the NFL proved that Deshaun Watson was guilty of sexual assault, that he posed a threat to the women around him, and that he compromised the integrity of the National Football League.
We knew that the NFL wanted Deshaun Watson to be suspended for an entire season and ultimately agreed upon an 11-game settlement with him and his camp and the Players Association. And that's where things landed. It's sort of the midpoint, obviously, between what Judge Sue Robinson decided, what the NFL initially wanted, and I think ultimately what you have is a resolution that seems to have pleased nobody in the process.
Well, I guess I'm confused, though, because what did the NFL say Deshaun Watson did to warrant the suspension? Because I can understand a company saying, sorry, 2 grand juries decided not to charge this guy. We have no reason to think he's done anything wrong. He's good to go. Or on the other hand, I can understand a company saying, we still think he did something wrong. We're firing him. Does 11 games mean that they think he did assault and or harass people?
It does. That is the case that the NFL brought to Judge Robinson. And, you allude to this, more than 24 women coming forward. The NFL didn't actually present all of those cases. In fact, only 5 were brought to Sue Robinson. Only 4 ultimately heard because one of the women decided not to be interviewed as part of this process.
I apologized beforehand. I think the second time I spoke to you guys, I actually apologized. But I think for some people, it didn't maybe register as I was apologizing.
From the jump, every time he has spoken, he has said he is innocent, that he not only didn't sexually assault or harass women, that he hasn't disrespected them. His language.
I was apologizing to all women and people that was affected about this situation because it's it's definitely a tough situation.
And I think that's something that may have caused some consternation with this ultimate decision because, you have Watson last week, by the way, in an interview with team media saying he was remorseful, sort of in vague terms. You have the Browns saying he has taken, accountability in all of this. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as the suspension comes out, Watson himself comes out and again to reporters says he has no remorse, that essentially he did nothing wrong.
Is he never supposed to play again? Is he never supposed to be part of society? Does he get no chance to rehabilitate himself? And that's what we're going to do, okay? And you could say, well, that's because he's a star quarterback. Well, of course. But if he was Joe Smith, he wouldn't be on the headlines every day. So.
And I think it's hard to square those two notions, the idea of accountability and remorse and next steps and therapy and all of this, everything coming out, on one side with Watson's own comments, which don't seem to really square with what's being said by the team and even himself in his statements.
Last question. Overall, where does the NFL go from here? Because if you're saying the NFL's saying, yeah, he did the things he's accused of, or at least did a version of them, what should the average fan expect when a famous player is accused of harassment or assault or worse?
Well, in deciding to suspend Watson for 11 games, this settlement, the NFL has effectively set a new precedent.
Okay.
So while, in many ways it feels, I think to a lot of people, it's just kind of observing the public reaction, insufficient given the fact that ultimately he is being suspended less than half a game for every accuser. Although, as I mentioned, not all of those accusers' cases were heard by the NFL. It's hard to reconcile that with the fact that we are going to see Deshaun Watson play football again.
The attorney representing all 24 accusers remains unsatisfied, saying in a statement tonight, the NFL has demonstrated that its ownership and the organization doesn't care about the accusers or the issues.
However, to your question, moving forward, this does mean that the NFL has a new baseline to work from. This is, by their standards, a very lengthy suspension. Now, I should add, it is a very minimal punishment when you hold it up against the amount of money that Deshaun Watson is being paid by the Cleveland Browns. His contract was structured so that he will be receiving pretty much all of the $230 million guaranteed at signing. And I think coming away from this news, the suspension, the fine, it's hard not to see that $230 million figure and hold it up against the $5 million fine, which is, of course, just a tiny, tiny fraction of that.
All right, Mina Kimes from ESPN. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This week, Customs and Border Protection said they detained nearly 200,000 people crossing the southern border just last month. And just to give you a sense of how many people are crossing the border right now, that was actually the lowest number we've seen in quite a while. And there could be a reason now to believe those numbers will continue to rise even higher from here. So what to make of all this? ABC's Maria Villarreal is at the border right now. She's in the town of Eagle Pass, right along the Rio Grande. And Maria, what are you seeing as far as the evolution of the migration crisis right now?
We're seeing very high numbers. I mean, there's a good chance that we will hit over 2 million very soon. Apprehensions in one fiscal year, that is breaking the record. But what I'm really seeing in this small town of Eagle Pass is a community that's overwhelmed and in a different way.
What is it like now? How many people are you processing through here a day?
500, an average of 500 daily.
We have a number of immigration policies that have been put in place to try and slow the flow of migrants, but even that is really not making a dent in the amount of people we're seeing.
The two guys in red, those guys just got dropped off at the bridge right up top, and they're already back around and crossing again.
We spent a lot of time along the river. We watched National Guard, local law enforcement do their thing.
So he's telling them, don't cross, it's very dangerous. That lady clearly has a kid with her, and they're telling her, do not cross in this area.
We also went up in a helicopter with DPS troopers. Within a few minutes of us being up in the air, we watched both the pilot and the assistant talk about seeing somebody almost immediately hiding in the bushes on the Mexico side of the border. And, they waited for this helicopter to kind of push off a little bit before they made their way across the river, and within seconds they were in the water and going.
I can see a group of about 4 or 5 that have already made it across into the U.S., and a second group is now just crossing the Rio Grande, and it looks like they're going to be intercepted by the crews on the ground.
Yeah, we saw these numbers dip a little in July, but like you said, just unprecedented when you look at the broader picture. And then just a week ago, the Biden administration pulls the plug on this program that was made under the Trump administration called Remain in Mexico, where you boot people back to Mexico while they await their asylum claim to be processed. Is that what's creating even more of a surge, right? Like, what is the difference maker here?
I think a lot of these families, a lot of these migrants that are coming here and crossing the river to get into the United States, not going through legal ports of entry, I think a lot of them are being told that now is the time to cross because there is a lot of confusion and infighting within the United States.
We are not finishing a wall. We are cleaning up the mess that the prior administration made.
I don't know of a larger crisis in our country right now, and this is a crisis caused by the Biden administration.
Basically, you have, for example, the state of Texas and the governor fighting with the feds and saying that the Biden administration isn't doing enough to support them. And then he's busing a lot of these migrants to the East Coast.
I have to provide services for families that are here, and that's what we're going to do. And that's what our responsibility as a city. I'm proud that this is a right to shelter state.
When you're looking at the cartels and these very sophisticated smuggling organizations, they know that this is happening. They are watching this unfold. And all of this means to them confusion about who is doing what certain agencies' role it is to, apprehend or not apprehend, who is going to, take you to a processing center or a shelter, or who's going to pay for what. So all of that plays into the confusion and the chaos and the frustration, which means this is the perfect time for migrants to cross.
It was just Texas and Arizona that bore the brunt of all of the chaos and all the problems that come with it. Now the rest of America is understanding exactly what is going on.
We saw Governor Greg Abbott speak with ABC News. He chatted with Byron Pitts for Nightline.
What would you like to see the Biden administration do?
So, having been a Texan my entire life, and having been a public official on the border, I've seen what works and what does not work. There were 4 policies that were put in place that worked better than anything that's worked in about 4 decades. And that is building the border wall, eliminating catch and release, the implementation of Title 42 policy, as well as the implementation of the Remain in Mexico policy.
He also says he feels like tools are being taken away from the agents and law enforcement people along the border. So when Migrant Protection Protocol, MPP, was taken away, which is the Remain in Mexico policy, that was one less tool for them to use and to try and hold against the migrants that are trying to come here and to seek asylum. He is still hoping that Title 42 stays in place and that agencies continue to use that. But again, that's being fought out right now in the federal court system, and that could also go away very soon. So right now, I think this is Abbott saying in his own way, shape, or form, we need help. We're not getting that from the federal government. Somebody needs to do something.
Apprehensions are expected to hit over 2 million in just 1 year. So right now, it is an all-out effort by local, state, and federal agencies here on the border.
This is a real problem. The DPS troopers that we rode along with in that helicopter, they're not running for election. They're trying to do their jobs. And they told me point blank, this feels never ending to them here in Eagle Pass. And it's the same problem, though, we saw a few years ago down on the Rio Grande border as well, the Rio Grande Valley. So I think this is just very indicative of showing that the immigration issues and policies that we have in place, they are just not working.
All right, Maria Villarreal in Texas. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
And one last thing. The U.S. is not the only country with big elections coming up this fall. Brazil has its elections in October. But this year, in a remote village as you make your way inland from Sao Paulo, one of the biggest debates in town there is over the Confederate flag. Yeah, from the American Confederacy.
It's pretty shocking, but there is a town in rural Sao Paulo, a state in Brazil where the city of Sao Paulo is located, that celebrates the Confederate flag. And
this is Sage Bear. She's a Fulbright scholar doing research in Brazil about this area that became the home of American Southerners in the 1860s. The Civil War is ending, slaveholding families see the writing on the wall, and a lot of them decide to find a country where they will be welcome.
The Confederates that moved to Brazil specifically chose Brazil because slavery continued to be legal there.
Lots of Americans settled in this town called Santa Barbara, where slavery remained legal for years afterwards. Enslaved people there were planting coffee at the time. Well, these Confederados, as they were called, began switching fields to cotton. But the bizarre part is even after 1888, when slavery was abolished in Brazil, this town continued to salute the American Confederacy.
I was very surprised the first time I showed up at the Cemitério do Campo, which is the cemetery where a lot of these Confederate ancestors are buried. The first thing you see when you walk into this cemetery is an enormous Confederate flag.
These days, the descendants of these Confederados speak Portuguese. They consider themselves Brazilian, but just like Brazilians in the U.S. might honor their ancestors with traditional folk dances, well, every year, these residents in Brazil hold a party doing the folk dances of the American South.
The Festa Confederada, which is a party that is pretty much to celebrate the Confederacy. And it does a mashup of sort of contemporary, sort of American South, country music, Southern foods. One of the centerpieces of the party is a performance of the song The Yellow Rose of Texas, in which women wear antebellum era gowns and they stand on all the stars of the Confederate flag that is painted onto that concrete court that I spoke about, and they dance to the song The Yellow Rose of Texas.
And if you watch video of this, the entire day is dedicated to reenacting the 1860s. You got little boys dressed up as Confederate soldiers, people waving the battle flag. Sage says if you're a Brazilian, it's easy to imagine all Americans seeing this as their history.
And it seems that it's spread all over Brazil. For instance, we found that the term the War of Secession was used interchangeably with the Civil War.
But now, 150 years later, times are changing in Santa Barbara. A local councilwoman has proposed a law that would prohibit racist symbols at public festivals, and the Confederate flag is on the list.
After Charlottesville, consciousness about the meaning of the Confederate flag began to rise in the area. And there was actually a debate organized in October of 2017 to talk about the use of the Confederate flag, and local activists, particularly from the Black community of Santa Barbara, suggested that the FDA, or the Fraternidade de Descendência Americana, the Fraternity of American Descendants, that they cease the use of the Confederate flag and that they start using the American flag because of the significance of the Confederacy.
At stake is the funding that would keep this party and therefore this town accessible. The festival relies on public infrastructure, meaning you can keep waving the flag, but your roads might not be paved next year. Sage says most residents, particularly Black residents, are in favor of the ban, partly because in a town that was built by Brazilian slaves, the story of Santa Barbara largely now revolves around North Americans.
I think that the strongest quote was from Sylvia Mota. She spoke to us about the law being in advance, but she said it's a regression for us to keep talking about American culture instead of Black culture, and that's the weight of the flag.
The weight of the flag. I just feel like that resonates there and here as well. Many thanks to Sage Bear, along with her research partner Zoc Benamotes, who published their reporting originally in the Christian Science Monitor. Start Here is produced by Kelly Therese, Jen Newman, Brenda Salinas Baker, Lewis Millman, Madeline Wood, Vika Aronson, Iru Ekpanobi, and Tara Gimbel. Ariel Chester is our social media producer. Josh Cohan is director of podcast programming. I'm our managing editor. Liz Alessi is the head of ABC Audio. Thanks to Lakia Brown, John Newman, and our intern, Ania McLean. Special thanks this week to Chris Berry, Eric Strauss, Chris Donato, Bruno Rober, and Cindy Smith. I'm Brad Milkey. See you next week.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you? Yeah.
So what will you be watching Saturdays on ABC News Live?
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon, 12 to 6 Eastern, every Saturday on ABC News Live.
My favorite show. These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.